Signori, buonasera. Welcome to New York University, Casa Italiana, Zerilli-Marimò, for the inauguration of the exhibit that you probably have already seen upstairs. And as you saw, it's a chronological reconstruction of the LGBTQ movement in Italy before it was called that. And as you saw, it's really a bibliography on the walls of the Casa with the color coding of the pink and the yellow. We have the fortune of having here with us Giulia Sbaffi, who is one of the curators, along with Michele, who is going to join us via Zoom. But allow me to say something about Giulia, also because she's here present, and also because she's a doctoral student. She's a professor. She's a doctor in philosophy with a degree taken in this department. And for us, it's always a great source of pride and of admiration for our grad students when they are able to do something like this. And we had Giulia here, and there is, I believe Marcella is in the audience. Marcella curated an exhibit last year. So this is also what the Casa is here for, to give a chance to our graduate students to express themselves, not only in the classroom as professors they will be, but also as public intellectuals, able to create a dialogue between academia, the community, and the city. And with this exhibit, I believe this is exactly what Giulia Sbaffi has done, curating this exhibit. It has a very troubled history, this little exhibit. Maybe you want to say something about it. Giulia, as I said, got her Ph.D. here at the Department of Italian Studies with a dissertation on the organization of sex labor in Italy, and very recently. And she's right now teaching here at NYU as a postdoc fellow. And it's a great pleasure to introduce her to you and to listen to her and her colleagues that she will introduce in turn, that will give us keys to be able to read this exhibit correctly. Please welcome them.
Thank you. Thank you, Wiggins. All right. Okay, so first of all, thank you so much to Stefano, Giulia, Chiara, and Kostya, who's been with me for so long this past few months, organizing this exhibition. Thank you to Marcella, who's the first person I talked to when we decided to do this exhibition. She also the one who started this wonderful tradition, and I'm very happy to have Alessandra Mulé was one of the graduate students here, and then Samuel Zawacki, who's been one of the master student and undergraduate student here in this department. So this is like a very peer kind of conversation on this side. On the other side of the world and on the other side of the screen, there is Michele Bertolino. Ciao, Michele. It's very late in Venice, but thank you for being here. Well, I curated the exhibition, so I'm not asking myself questions. Alessandra will do that. And so I'm going to give this mic to her soon. But I think it's very important for me to be here surrounded by all my colleagues and friends. I want to thank everyone who supported us in doing this, especially Julie, Esme, being like, Sammy, like going up and down like crazy in the past few days, and all the grads are here. I hope this can give you the sense that these things are possible, and that there is life behind the dissertation, and this dissertation can be actually alive and being painted on the wall. I can give you this as a kind of testimony. And it's very wonderful, and Casa is very generous, and it will give you like all the support that you need in order to make a way of giving back all the labor that we do here, care labor, intellectual labor. So just stick around and do this kind of activity because it's fun.
Okay, so given that Giulia doesn't want to ask herself questions or introduce herself and all the wonderful things that she's done, I'm going to do it for her. As you know, she's a postdoctoral teaching fellow at NYU, and she's currently working on her book project on sex work and political organizing in 1980s Italy, which comes from her work on her dissertation. She's also translating Massimo Prearo's book. She translated Massimo Prearo's book on anti-gender and anti-LGBT legislation in Italy, and her work has appeared in the Italianist, in Modern Italy, and on Italica. Michele Bertolino is a curator and researcher living between Turin and Rome. He currently collaborates with Fondazione Sandretto Rere Baudengo as coordinator of the Young Curators Residency Program. He recently edited the publication Porpora, a photographic book of Lina Pallotta's work on Porpora Marcasciano. He curated exhibitions in several institutions, among those Mambo, Bologna, Las Tango, Zurich, Fondazione San Direttore Rebadengo in Turin. His writings have been published in Nero magazine, Flash Art, and other several magazines. Samuel Zawacki is a Ph.D. candidate in Italian language and literature at Johns Hopkins University. He earned a master's degree in Italian studies in 2019 from New York University. In his dissertation project, Queer Lies, Truth, Identity, and Dissimulation in Italian Trans Auto-Narration, Samuel explores the performance of trans identity and the strategic deployment of dissimulation and self-misrepresentation in trans-authored works of memoir and autofiction. His research interests include contemporary Italian literature, film, critical theory, feminist and gender studies, trans theory, and autobiography studies. Additionally, he is currently completing a full-length translation of Romina Cecconi's Io la Romanina, Perché sono diventato donna, as part of a larger project to make Italian trans narratives accessible and teachable in the Anglophone context. And he has served as assistant editor to the Italian issue of Modern Language Notes since 2019. Okay, now that we've done all the proper introductions, I'm going to tell you something about what of course, I'm very happy to be here, and there's something that I was very happy to be able to see the exhibition in these past couple of days. I've seen Giulia and Michele working on it for the past few months, and it's been beautiful to see them working together, and it's been beautiful to see how the exhibition has developed in the past few months. So I'm just going to tell you some of my impressions, my first impressions of the exhibition and what it felt like for me to see it today for the first time. And there were a couple of things that kind of moved me. The first one is connected to the power of names and ideas printed on the walls that I look at every day in my routinely activities here at Casa Italiana. The thing that I really like about this exhibition is the fact that it's like an outside archive, an outside bibliography that occupies the spaces, times, and gazes of mine and other students' daily lives. And that in doing so, in like occupying our daily lives, it crosses boundaries between different publics, between different disciplines, histories, and between the idea of research as work and the idea of research as a meaningful observation of the ordinary. It is an exhibition that can be crossed quickly with the faces and slogans of the multiple activists and protagonists of the Italian queer movement accompanying you to class. But it also is an exhibition that tells you to stop everything, to be late to class, to read every single leaflet and summary, and to look at every single face. And to look specifically, that's the faces that I was most interested in looking at, to look at Porpora Marcasciano's smiles as she hugs Angela Davis and Silvia Rivera, to laugh maybe at the condom-shaped drawings and at the irony of their slogans. It is also an exhibition that reminds all of us very clearly that queerness, queer history, queer studies are also and primarily about love and desire. And as two of my favorite slogans of the exhibition read, l'unica legge è quella del desiderio, the only law is the law of desire, and amore ci preserva, love preserves us, saves us. So the first question that I have for the two curators today is related primarily to what kind of care you put into the exhibition, what kind of love you put into the exhibition, and why did you decide to do the exhibition here, and what this kind of choice meant for you. Printing this kind of public bibliography in a space like Casa Italiana, involving this multiplicity of sources, pages of books, posters, leaflets, newspaper pages, laws, and how this multiplicity and collectivity is represented. And maybe, Giulia, you can tell us a little bit about this kind of proximity of the archive and the word that this exhibition puts in place.
Thank you. This was a beautiful question. Now that I can start talking about this exhibition, I would like also to say to Michele that I'm really grateful that we did this together, and it's been wonderful working with you all this time. We did it, and it's
Yeah.
wonderful. You'll see it soon.
Thank you.
The reason why we decided to do it here, I think there are multiple reasons. We met here, like we work together here, and Michele is a researcher, and I am trying to continue finishing my research, and we are both obsessed with archive and queer lives. We are also like queer people, and it's important for us to tell the story of the community that are like cross spaces that we now live in, or that are part of the legacy of like written about life and desire and love and body and relationship and struggle and things that have been like very important for us. So the first thing is that we love archive. We did a lot of work in the archives, and we had the strong kind of urge to do something with the archival material that we both had in our store in our computers, basically. So that leads me to the second part of your question, is why here, right? So I think that when I saw Michele's work, especially when he did the exhibition in Prato with Lina Pallotta, photograph of Porpora Marcasciano, there was a lot of New York. And I was like, oh, wow. So this is a connection. I mean, I know that the connection was there, but there was a connection that I wanted to highlight and I wanted to bring here in a moment when I was doing also my work about queer lives here in New York. And so that I put my teacher and like scholar hat on because I don't know how to think visually, and that's something that I learned thanks to him. And so I was thinking, we were thinking about something that can give you, provide an experience of learning for people in general. The first people that saw the exhibition this morning were our students. They had like a preview. I brought my students, and Nicola Ross brought his students, intermediate Italian 2, and I brought mine. They were like first-year seminar, and we did like scavenger activity, hunts activity, and I asked them to look on the wall and find the books that we read in class, and they were like immediately spot that. And the first text that they pointed out was Audre Lorde, The Power of the Erotic. And I think that not only speaks to the power of the erotic is not necessarily about the sexual or about pornography. It's about the desire of being, the desire of appearing, the desire of being here, of using this power that we all have to create lives, to create spaces, to create community, to forge community, to be free, to dance and have fun. You'll see a lot of people dancing in the picture that we chose. So it's funny that they pointed at it, because for me it's like, this is exactly the text that we had in mind. That it was important for us, and it was important for all the community that you see on the walls. And so these are readings that are important not only to read the exhibition, but also to understand what we put into the exhibition and why they were so obsessed with themselves and their community, because they were imagining a world, and still imagining a world that forged on love, care that sat in a very different way, and labor as well, and many other topics. So that's why we wanted to be here. It's it can be seen as a didactic in the good sense of the world, and a learning experience. It's also an intervention, though. Like with the selection, this is a selection that we leave you no option for. We just decided what's on it. You have to trust us. This is like the material that we collected, and we put it on the wall. And we also decided to have a very strong intervention on the chronology, 1982 to the early 2000s. And this is something that we went through on, and we just discussed it in cafes and here in New York, and we'll talk more about later. But so there is this learning experience, but it's also like a learning experience that's very much guided by the decision that we made together, by just talking over and over and going through material and just like reading all this document, trying to give our own interpretation of it.
Thank you. Now I have a question for Michele. It's kind of very similar to the one that I asked Giulia, but I'd like you to talk a little bit about the meaning behind the form of this exhibition and of creating this kind of ring or embrace that covers the walls. And what did it mean for you to curate an exhibition in such a space with students, etc., and specifically why this form and why the choice of including the bibliography in the entrance hall, which is the most accessible room of this space at Casa Italiana, and instead develop the archival material across the walls of the hallway and in the filing cabinet in the second room. So what's more like the formal choices of this choice and of this exhibition and what it meant for you, of course, too, in terms of the labor that you put into it. Thank you.
Thank you. First of all, hi, everyone. I opt not to be too silly because I'm tired. And so I might like do a lot of mistakes while like answering, but I try. And I wanted to adjust one thing on what Giulia said on why the exhibition happened there. And it's also because like the exhibition comes out of multiple hours of conversation that started before the idea of doing an exhibition, just like talking about chronology with Giulia when I was there. And so it was kind of like, I don't know, imagining a way. Giulia said that like she cannot like think visually. I mostly do that. And so I thought that it was a beautiful way to like merge those things in one. So I really think it's about love also in that sense. So it's not only about love when it comes to like the kind of history that we are trying to like understand better, but it's also in like a methodology. So so this was just one thing that I wanted to add. Then when it comes to the formal choices that we did for the show. You know, we discussed it a lot about chronology, and so we discussed a lot about linearity, and we discussed a lot about recurring events or recurring like issue that have affected the queer LGBTQ plus movement and in the past, in the 80s, in the 90s, and are still like in some way present, at least when it comes to the LGBTQ plus movement in Italy. So this idea of recurrent, of like going back and like back and forth on those on kind of like the same situation or like situation that they were like representing themselves felt like, you know, like a starting point on how to imagine how to display documents in a space. So that's why rings. And also rings that then at some point they start to repeat themselves, like going back to the beginning. It is about circularity in a very basic sense, but it's about circularity also as a recurrence of things. It's like this, like so it's also going back to the archives and try to like uncover what happened then. So also like about chronology, and the dates that we choose with Giulia are kind of dates that are not so common, so to say, when it comes to the Italian history, the history of the Italian queer movement. But it's also dates to like kind of show up that we are not doing like this thing for the first time. So again, like this, like elements of like ring as circularity. And bibliography was because like it's a place to study, basically. Like it's not it's not a museum, but it's a place where people go to study and to do research. So the exhibition should be, and I hope is useful in a way. I mean, I hope that every exhibition is useful, but like even more when it is located like in a place where people pass by and go through to like research. So and because bibliography, it's also kind of was another kind of common ground for me and Giulia in developing the exhibition. I mostly work as contemporary art curator, but every project that I do starts from bibliography. And it's something that like relates very much with like a more like canonical work of like the academia world. So it was another kind of like, yeah, common ground on which to like play a bit. It's very, I mean, just to say that it's very playful then at the end, like it doesn't look like so maybe, but for me it's very playful. So that's it. Thank you.
It is for sure very playful. Thank you, Michele. Maybe we can either talk about translation a little bit or chronology. Let's talk about
It's actually kind of bridging these two. I was structurally, you just mentioned that the first people to see the exhibition today were your students, from here at NYU, and I'd love if you could dive a little bit more into, I guess, some of the considerations that you as curators made when putting this together, knowing that the primary people seeing this exhibition are going to be here, non-Italians in New York, in the U.S. This exhibition very much so could exist in Italy and could have a very Italian audience, but you were creating it here for this audience. So I'm not sure if there were specific considerations made for the fact that you had primarily non-Italian speakers looking at it, things like that.
Oh, two, no, that's too much. One, it's enough. I can speak one in Italian and one in English and going back and forth on my own. Yeah, I think that's an excellent question. So the consideration we made, I think we knew that this would have been primarily like an exhibition for English speaker, people that have little knowledge of Italian, possibly. First of all, in terms of students, it's for them an opportunity. We're talking with Nicolò this morning. It's an opportunity for students who are learning Italian just to immerse themselves when they're like from abroad into like something that could easily be shown in Italy. So for them, they can go around, they can sort of like try to understand what's going on there, and then talk with one another, help each other to have a learning experience. And so there is that element. Then the other element is that every single document is accompanied by a caption that's translated in English that summarizes the content of the document. There is a lot of visuals, so like the text in terms of numbers, not a lot. And so we also thought of that. We wanted to have a lot of image of people dancing because we wanted to be playful, as Michele just asked. You'll see a lot of people dancing, a lot of people singing, a lot of people in the street, a lot of people hugging, a lot of people talking. And they have also pamphlet that we had graphics and images. Then there is a lot of English also in this exhibition. There is a lot of English because English has always been used as primarily in a queer context. It's also a topic that we have to discuss more broadly, which like the importance of translatable and untranslatability of queer identity in Italian. I'm not talking just about like the gender, the grammar. I'm just like talking about why all the terms that we have are most primarily in English has always been like that. There's been a discussion in the 90s. We tried to highlight that in our exhibition. There was publication, first of all, the one called Queer, C-U-I-R, in the 90s was critiquing this heavily use of English translation, the presence of English in the Italian culture. So for us, it was an intervention also maybe on that. Not as clear as I'm saying it right now, but it's also like the idea of bringing something that's coming from Italy and contaminated by English and primarily in Italian. And then there are documents in English as well. And where we found documents in English, we translated them. We put them in the exhibition. But these are documents that come from private archives, personal archives. These are notes, letters, and so we just wanted to keep it this way. And I think that this can enrich the experience that people might have, depending on the knowledge that they have of English or no knowledge at all. They of Italian. That's a good lapsus. They can just like have their own experience, I guess. I don't know if Michele wants to add anything on the translation.
So maybe not specifically in this translation, because I'm not like super strong on that, but in terms of bridging a bit, like also with a chronology. Yeah, it's true that this exhibition could happen in Italy also, but maybe not. I don't know. Like the kind of context that is provided by Casa Italiana is a very specific one that is very different to what you can find like in Italy. It's a very kind of nerdy show, and the way that it is constructed, the history of the queer movement is like a possible chronology that kind of posits the way to look at Italian queer movement in a different way, so to say. Like, it's not at all about the 70s, even if we love the 70s, but like it's about like a different way to understand that. And I think it's like it's also like trying to like give a different look onto the Italian queer movement that maybe like when it comes from like a outside look on Italian queer history, it's mainly focused on what happened in 77 and like 72 before and so on and so forth. And then like 80s and 90s feels like a bit more like chill. But in fact, like there is this, so kind of like complicating a bit more like the view on the history also of the Italian queer movement was something that I think was like kind of like another consideration that we had when we were thinking about locating and specifically there the shop. Yeah, I hope I didn't mess too much.
Thank you, Michele. Maybe we can talk a little bit about the fact when we were talking earlier, you mentioned the fact that you chose not to include any picture that had just one single individual in it, and maybe we can talk a little bit about this. And I'd like you to talk also about how a little bit more about the chronology and what it. The exhibition testifies to a lot of first times in Italian queer history and the LGBTQ movement in Italy. And what does it mean? What does this kind of opening of possibility mean in the sense of the temporality of the queer archive and of queer movements? And how is this developed in the exhibition?
I think, I don't know if we choose it, but definitely as I was looking around the exhibition yesterday as we were installing it and today more carefully, it's true that it's only, there is only one person that is the president of the, is the last image that is Mazen Massoud, who's the president of the Metos, a trans man from Libya, who's the only one character, the only one you can actually see on his own in an image. I don't know, Michele, if you noticed that, but that's definitely present in, when you see Porpora is always surrounded by other people. When you see Porpora is either Porpora hugging Leslie Feinberg, Angela Davis, Silvia Rivera, Marcella Di Folcola, always with other people, because we would decenter a little bit this idea of, at least to me, I feel to decentralize this idea that they're like figure, and they disfigure to the whole the work. The figures are important, pioneers are important. One of the reasons why we have Sam here is because he's working on La Romanina, and La Romanina, Mario Mieli, they are not present necessarily in the exhibition, but they are there. Their ethos, their work, their importance, their legacy is there. Similarly, all the archive documents that you see comes from archives that have name of people such as Aldo Mieli, who's one of the pioneers of the gay movement before the Second World War. And then there's Porpora Marcasciano archive, there's Lina Pallotta archive, and then there's us curators like inserting that. These are the individuals that are like behind the scene. But then on the scene, there are the movements and the collective movements. And for us, this was important also because of what Michele was saying, the chronology. We're just like going around this, but maybe I'll tackle a little bit more because following up on what Michele was saying and trying to answer your question. The 70s are often present in the memory of, and not only the memory, but the knowledge of people like looking at Italy. And oftentimes we think of the 80s either as the year of the white roll of the riflusso, where like when nothing happened, if not neoliberalism and the return of the domesticity and like the family unit. It wasn't true. Like there was a vibrant, very creative community of people doing a lot of activism in the streets of cities and in small provincial cities and in big cities. So there you don't only see the protagonism of big cities such as Rome, but you see like also like Bologna or other cities. And that was very important for us. So that's where We know that the 70s had a very important legacy on the socialization of movements, but then we start with the 1980s. We try to build a new narrative on that, and that is for us was forged by community that were taking care of each other. The other big theme in this exhibition is HIV, although we also center that at the center, but we look also at HIV from different perspectives. Not only the perspective of the gay community was definitely important, but that of harm reduction, sex work activism, lesbian activism, trans activism. So we are working on this also new narrative. But this shows all these elements can be together because of the community work, the care work, the labor of love that these people were doing, also in creating archives. So for them, it was important because as you feel maybe a little bit like embraced, but this document that we put, and maybe a little bit overwhelmed, this overwhelming feeling shows a presence. They were there, they were collecting stuff, they were producing, they were thinking, and in their thinking, they were like collecting and forming a new idea of the world that was including thinking about labor, thinking about the environment. There is a beautiful, beautiful letter that Michele found, Mario Miali, writing about the connection between the gay movement and the struggle against what we will now call climate change or for the environment. There is a lot of demonstration and strikes for labor, for migrants. And so you can see that they were like creating also through the archives, through this communication, this new, very enlarging, expansive view of what they wanted the world to be. And this was happening in the 80s and then continue in the 90s, in spite of the HIV crisis. And then even after that, in the early 2000s, creating always new way of being together, always new way of doing activism, always new way of creating also other narratives and keeping like some sort of revolutionary rhetoric in it, even when the Archie gay happened, and so there was like a division between the community base and a more institutionalized framework for the queer movements, discussion of what queer movements is or shouldn't be, because I'm keep using queer, but I'm attaching a label that, for example, in the 2000 was in the early 2000s was very much discussed. Do we want to call us in a certain way or another? Do we want to call us gay, lesbian, and trans, or something else? So this all plays around the chronology that for us is the pillar of the exhibition that we created, that with that opens up these too many questions and hopefully expands the territory of research, discussion, and complicates a little bit all those narratives outside of the stigmatization or positive or negative that this movement have.
And maybe there's also an element of reaching something and wanting more. Perhaps you want to talk a little bit about that.
I mean, yes, like this is there is a circularity, but not in the sense of like a backlash, like going back and going forward. No, it's like a constant frontlash, like they keep moving and keep going and trying to think in new ways. You'd be surprised, but even though we often associate Italy with the fact that there is no gay marriage, there was the document in Empoli. I'm going to ask Michele to speak a little bit about that. That was from 1995. That shows the first legislative intervention to provide, like, to give gay people the right to just be together and recognize formally. And then we have Marcella Di Folco elected in 1995. So it's also a way of deconstructing this idea that Italy always go backwards. Yes, we have problem. Yes, there is passion for fascism. We saw that with Rossella Schillaci movie, but there is also a recurrent theme of resistance and how resistance is connected to love. We're talking also, again, in her movie, and it was only 2 days ago, about the passion of love during the Resistenza, and I was watching another video from the strikes in the UK in 1985, and women talking about how much fun they had during the strike because their men were home and they were having sex all the night instead of just having them in the mind. So these themes belong to everyone. And so it's not just the queer people that I found that talk about sex all the time. It's about bringing care and love and desire at the center of the struggle. And this just didn't happen only in the 70s where the EPs, but it kept going. It kept fueling this body that as you can see in the documents, is always very happy, joyful, and having fun despite, and making fun of people around them. The element of irony is very powerful in deconstructing narrative that often oppress people or the image that people might have of people itself.
Michele, do you want to add something?
I mean, I can, but like Giulia put it down so beautiful. So I don't know. Like, I just want to have like in terms of, I want to like underline the fact that also the collection of the document is a collective collection of documents, meaning it's true that it's document that like me and Giulia had on our like kind of drive or computer or whatever, but they are a result of like long years of like putting together material and asking people around what like their point of view on like Italian queer history and their point of view on like what the movement did and how the movement moved. So it's of course all the personal archive that Giulia mentioned, but it's also like just talks together with like activists and kind of like researcher people that in some way are crossing in and out the LGBTQ plus movement. So I'm not listing everyone because it's a lot, but it's just also like kind of underlining the fact that also the construction of the collection of documents is not like just Giulia and I. It's more like trying to put together people in order to share what we all know. And then in terms of love and the 80s, it's fun that Giulia mentioned 1995, because actually 1995 is like a year in the apparently in the in the history of LGBTQ movement. It's the Empoli municipal law that recognized kind of informally, was not like marriage or a civil union whatsoever, but was more like the municipality recognizing same-sex couples. But it was also the year of the huge manifestation in Verona that sparked out of municipal laws in Verona, anti-sex work and transphobic, homophobic, biphobic, lesbophobic laws that the city hall of Verona put forward after European law that came like out a few months before, and that huge movement that developed after the laws that the city of Verona put forward in January end up in a huge manifestation in September in Verona that was kind of like massive, meaning meaning really putting together groups, queer groups from the south to the north, and putting them together to work like against like municipality of Verona, but proposing like a different way of understanding society. And this was in 1995, in kind of like the peak of the HIV/AIDS crisis in Italy that came like a bit after than the one in the US. So also like the way in which like the political movement and the political issue that were raised by the LGBTQ plus movement in the 80s and 90s it's still like super. They are still today super relevant, but they were in the 80s and 90s political issues that were going way beyond like the idea of withdrawal or the idea of just like community care when it comes to HIV, AIDS, like activism. And this is something that like I think the exhibition kind of wants to show very well. and we hope it does. I don't know, but like it was at least one kind of point that we wanted also to underline together. And and then when it comes to care and love and this like kind of recurring presence of like a community that moves together, it's something that it's always kind of like present in the documents and in the photos that we collected. It's all about like people that decided to construct their own private archive out of the necessity to preserve something that they knew it would have been probably lost. And that's a pure act of love. If it's only that, basically. So, this is what we do then at the end, no? So that's it. Yeah.
Thank you so much,
Few things.
Michele. Yeah.
Actually, just to continue with that, this question of the act of love is really resonating because I've been lucky enough to work with Romina Ciacconi. She's the first trans woman in Italy. She transitioned in 1968, published a memoir, Io la Romanina perché sono diventato donna, in 1976. And she has collected her own personal archive. And what I mean by personal archive is 2 cardboard boxes that are mostly ripped apart, shoved under her couch, that are full of every newspaper article ever about her, every photo that she could collect, everything that she could get her hands on that reminded her of the past, that reminded her of both the ups and the downs. She has these horrible articles that were written by the Florentine press. In fact, one of them that I think of, after she was married, she got married in 1977. At that point, 72 is when she was recognized and had her documents legally changed to be to have feminine markers. That was the first time that her real name, her dead name, was used in the newspaper. Before that, she was always called La Romanina, the little girl from Porta Romana. But she holds on to these scathing articles and puts them next to the beautiful articles, the photos from her marriage, all of that. Out of what is an act of love, out of an act of remembrance of everything that she's gone through. And she truly loves these materials. I've spoken with her numerous times at this point about digitizing them, getting them into the Meet archive, for example, getting them into these larger archives to make them accessible. And she always says, yes, 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 but when I'm dead. I want them with me. I don't want to let go of these pieces until I no longer possess them. They're such dear things to her, and I know that you guys used quite a few pieces from personal archives as well. I'm not sure if you ran into any similar situations or just what the experience was like working with really private materials like that.
I don't know how much of that material we have, but definitely on the act of love as an act also of antagonism. So this idea of preserving and expanding, enlarging the scope of the possibility of being is also an act that oftentimes, especially in the 80s and with a big jump after the turn of the 90s and the early 2000s, is seen as active resistance and active opposition towards the institution and the state. So the idea of we keep it home and we circulate it in different ways and with our own production of magazines and circulation of pamphlets and creating consultoria like spaces, community center, and they were providing health support and mental health support during the HIV, but not only that, it was meant of creating kind of spaces of resistance where love and care were filled as a way of creating something that was opposed to the status quo. And it was doing that also as a way of creating narrative that could have just like breached and destroyed that. So it resonates with me, the idea of multiplying this and this circulating as much as possible and keep it at home or keep it for the people that you want to get access to it. Also because there is this idea that whatever the state touches it, it ruins it. And there's a point about that in the documents around the early 2000s and the social forum in Florence, when you see the intervention by Elena Biagini, she's a wonderful scholar. She is a wonderful activist. She's done so much for the lesbian community, which is often neglected among the queer communities for the radical work that it does. It brings in the oppression, the women oppression, but also the oppression of having always like a very radical take that is not often digested by the community or creates a lot of tension. And she has done an amazing work collecting this material, publishing a lot. Her Immersione Imprevista, it's a wonderful book. But she was also very active in the 90s. That's the point I was trying to make. And in the early 2000s, she made this intervention in Florence when she was critiquing the idea of LGBT, whatever, gay people, same sex. It's not, that is not, it doesn't work for me, sorry. And I say it as a part of the community, so I think I can say it. It's not working for us because what is happening to us, we were reduced to the same nuclear structure of the straight family. And so it's interesting to see there's like always a negotiation, always a territory of an uncertain territory that you don't know how much you want to cross. So I see how that can trigger then personal and individual fears that go hand in hand with love and can sometimes make it feel not super comfortable in sharing this. Because outside there is many conflicts and many different nuances and different narration that you might have to think about as you move forward. And archiving your stuff and exposing that, that's a lot. Also because it can be easily instrumentalized. We don't talk about negative things tonight. We talk about care and love, but it is also that element that plays a lot in that, right? There is turfism, and there is like a lot of instrumentalization and misinterpretation of all these documents. So protecting that is also being aware of what's outside on the other side of the barricade, because they're still thinking along, not thinking necessarily along this term, but these things are still real and affecting their life.
Mm-mm. Can I add one thing on that, like to go a bit back to this idea of personal archives that like, just like to give like some, like, you know, stories to tell stories. There are documents coming from Porpora Marcasciano private archive, which is kind of like a box also, completely like a full mess. But there are also tons of documents coming from Graziella Bertozzo personal archive, and Graziella Bertozzo is an activist, still quite like fighting for it, and she was like the first vice president of Archie Gay as a lesbian activist. She left Archie Gay in '94, and then like she moved like more into what we could say like is like the movement part of the movement, less institutionalized. And she has an amazing huge archive, also super massive in her own place, with like all the documents that like really tells the story of the 80s and the 90s in Italy. So it's still a lot about this personal archive, and it's still a lot about personal archive that we don't know about, and are like just preserved by people that are how like of this need and urge to preserve. And very similarly, it's the work that Biagini did for l'immersione imprevista, so it's kind of like this urgency also of like trying to bring back what has been hidden or what has been lost also. Like as just like to add one thing, one research that I'm doing that is not so present in this show, but hopefully it will come out at some point, is this research on Italian artists and how they react to HIV/AIDS crisis. We know very well the story from the US perspective, from the New York perspective, I would say, but we don't know what happened in Italy. We don't know what artists were doing in those here, how they reacted to that, what kind of work they did, what kind of imaginations they put forward. No, and it's a gap in that story. That is not a gap because nothing happened. Like tons of things happened. It's just that we forgot, and it was like 40 years ago, so to say. So like all this kind of private, personal archive that were born out of a pure act of love, and so are also like all archives that we still need to like uncover and dig and try to like bring back into like a public sphere. But I'm very happy that Giulia mentioned Elena Biagini and the article that Elena wrote in 2002, which I think is one of the masterpieces in the show. So for those who read Italian, it's a must read. That's it.
All right. I think we can move on to. Thank you so much, Michele, for your last answer. Maybe we can have David come here, right? Hmm?
Say some concluding things, yeah? I'm not sure, I don't want, I mean, I'm not sure what my role is here. I'm very grateful to have been asked by Giulia to do this, but I don't want to be the voice of the institution. So I will sit down, take my proper place here. I guess I've been asked because I was Giulia's Ph.D. dissertation advisor. But when I say advisor, there are two kinds of advisor, really. There is PhDs you advise when you know a lot about the subject and you actually tell your candidate what to read and what to do. And there's these ones where I knew almost nothing about what Giulia was working on. And she taught me. I mean, she really did. I think I learned pretty much everything I now know about the trans rights movement and the political organization of sex workers in Italy in the 1980s, which was a period when I was living in Italy quite on and off, more in the 70s, a bit less in the 80s, but I knew nothing about this at the time. I've learned from Giulia. So, I think in a way this exhibition, obviously Michele and Giulia have kind of worked together on this, but it is a kind of celebration of a lot of things that Giulia worked on and making it public, and I'm very excited to have it here. So that's kind of point number one. I could go on for a long time about Giulia's dissertation, but I think the most exciting thing that she did was, she did field work in Catania, in San Birillo, an area of Catania. She went twice to do quite in-depth work with a group of trans sex workers there, who at the first were, she tells in her dissertation, rather suspicious of her, distrustful, and then she gained their trust, and in the end, when she left, they threw a party for her. Very, very moving. And one of the things that comes out of that dissertation, particularly in that chapter, is the importance of, this has been discussed just now, the importance of love and care, particularly in the 80s, which of course, from the 80s going into the mid-90s, the high point of the HIV/AIDS epidemic in Italy, when love and care became a political issue. That wasn't the case in the 60s and 70s. I mean, if you look at 60s radicalism and 70s, I'm doing a course on this at the moment with my undergraduates, people didn't talk about love and care. Even in the feminist consciousness-raising groups, the Gruppi di Autocoscienza, it was a safe space for women to talk, but they didn't talk about care or love. They talked about giving themselves mutual support, about becoming aware of exploitation or patriarchy. But a language of love and care really comes out of the extremely difficult situation of vulnerability of HIV/AIDS, and this was kind of flipped over into a kind of positive political movement. So I think that's one of the things I learned from Giulia's work. Number two, Giulia says it was great, and actually Michele as well, wonderful, fun to work with archives. I mean, I can tell you not all archives are fun to work with. Some are extremely boring. And clearly what's exciting about this show is that the material is exciting. It's exciting partly because, and I think this is one of the things I've always found fascinating about, queer activism, is that people who are living a situation of what you might call marginality, a term I worked on and I don't really like using, but, because it's always a way of describing people as outside the mainstream, outside whatever. But people who are living a condition of marginality, social exclusion, discrimination, kind of flip that over into a kind of celebration of their own positivity and their own agency and their own strength as a community. And that comes across so strongly in all the material in the exhibition. I think, you really see this idea that, these people are vulnerable. They're dying, they get sick, they're being discriminated, they're being beaten in some cases and they're undergoing violence, but they manage to kind of have a kind of collective agency and sense of mutual care that gets them through it. And I think that's such a powerful story, and it comes out very well in the exhibition, even though I've only had a very brief chance to look at it. Last thing I wanted to say is, one of the things that Giulia's research has done, I think, comes out in this exhibition. The time frame is 1982 to 2002, right? And the 80s, for many people who read conventional histories of Italian, political histories of Italy, the 80s is a kind of dead period. It's a period of riflusso, of kind of retrenchment after the activism of the 60s and 70s. In a sense, that's true. I mean, I'm teaching a course at the moment that goes from 1960 to 1980, and, the end of the 70s with the abduction of Moro, the killing of Aldo Moro, the roundup of all the activists on the left, the destruction of the whole left movement, seems to be the end of an era of political activism. You go into the 80s, you get Craxismo, this right-wing socialist prime minister who dominates that decade, the beginnings of neoliberalism, a period of economic growth. So, the conventional story of that is this is a period where activism disappears. It retreats. It goes into kind of private spaces. I think what Giulia's research shows and what this exhibition also shows is that's not really true. Activism doesn't die away. It takes different forms. New protagonists emerge. Sex workers, trans activists become, active, become visible in a way they weren't before. And the 80s is a time of kind of growth and revelation of those groups, and also of the centri sociali, in a time of great hardship and difficulty, economic retrenchment, but also, the AIDS crisis. And that is a time where we need to rethink how that worked. Last thing I wanted to say is this exhibition ends in 2002. Is that right? What about the 22 years since then? As you probably know, we're living through very hard times at the moment. I mean, as I speak, if you've been following the news recently, two of the gains of that period, legislative gains, the abortion law of 1978, Law 194, and the law on transgender rights, which is Law 164 of 1982, are under attack. So the Curated hospital in Florence, which is one of the hospitals that does gender reassignment surgery and hormonal treatment, now the Minister of Health, Orazio Schillaci, right-wing Minister of Health, is now sending in inspectors into that hospital to see what they're doing and how they're treating young people who want gender reassignment. The abortion law is also coming under attack. I think just this week, the Senate passed, the Camera passed a law which allows anti-abortionists to go into abortion clinics. Right, extraordinary thing, and that's kind of riding on the wave of what happened in this country with the Supreme Court's decision overturning Roe v. Wade. Now there's a kind of wave of anti-abortion activism going through Europe. So, these are very bad times. And now looking back, we can see that 20-year period between 1982 and 2002 as a period of creativity and, self-assertion that is now threatening to be taken away. So it's very, very nostalgic and important, I think, to recognize what this exhibition shows. That's all I want to say. Thank you.
Thank you, David, for these conclusions. Maybe we can move on to the Q&A, if anybody has any questions.
Hello. I've spent a couple years in Italy recently. I just did dual citizenship, Giuro Sanguini, and I can speak a bit of Italian now, but my first few years there, gay culture was impenetrable. And one of the things that interests me about what you're doing with this is, I guess how it was presented to me when I was there. I was like popping in from Northern Europe and being like, where's the gay bars? Like, where are the parties? Where are people hanging out? And they're like, oh, it's at people's houses and you have to know somebody. And I've always been attracted to older men. So like I ended up living in Sicily and it's horrible. It's like being in the Midwest in the 90s or something. So are you going to use this catalog that you've created to help increase
open a bar?
Huh?
Open a bar, open a queer
Not
bar,
open, well,
or like do a fuck,
well,
where
no,
FIAQ, where you can find all the bars.
It's not necessarily about like a fucking Damron's guide for Italy fag culture, but coming at it from an academic point of view, like for me, being able to understand the history of Italy from an American perspective is mind-boggling enough, but the queer culture, how do you access the queer culture? Like a couple friends of mine I got to watch a documentary on the trans prostitutes of Catania when I was living there that somebody had, Mm-hmm. And I have a friend who just made a documentary about researching her own trans culture mm-hmm. in Naples. So I know that there's work on that being done, but are you making like all this work you've done with this bibliography, do you have any interest in creating a website or making something more accessible to this history of queer culture for people who don't speak Italian very well?
Are we, Michele? Are we gonna do this?
Do it!
I can take a visually, so.
We cannot say no.
We cannot say no. We cannot
happen. It could happen.
Yes.
But I think there is a lot of things that are going on in terms of letting people know about queer Italian culture to non-Italian speaker. Like I'm thinking about the translation of Porpora Marchesano book, the translation of La Romanina book. Mario Miele is kind of like a huge figure. Pier Vittorio Tondelli has been like translated also in French very recently again, and in English with a kind of new translation. So like when it comes to like culture and how like what's the production of queer Italian culture, I think that has been out. Like it's been like a process of like putting that out in a way. We need more. We always need more. We always want more. The only law is that of desire. So of course we need more. But yeah, but I see that there is like kind of like also like the work that Giulia did in terms of like intersection between like sex work movement and trans movement and queer movement. Like it's all about like trying to show a different, I hope, like a different image of queer culture in Italy, which is unfortunately is not about bars, but it's about like all of the rest. No? I mean, that's my take on that. I don't know, Giulia. I mean, Giulia for sure has more to say on that.
No, no. I think the one thing that maybe is that yes, it's something is there. However, the problem is the accessibility. That's what I am hearing from you, which is true, and mostly speaks to the fact that given the climate that we are experiencing right now, and given also how tiring it is to having like, we haven't talked about this, but like the Catholic rhetoric and the Catholic Church and what's happening in schools, what's always been happening in schools, and how difficult it's been for people to come out even in the early 90s and early 2000 when queer culture was not as mainstream as it is today, but was definitely present, plays a huge effect on, and just like community take care of each other. And then if you can just like you can be brought in, you can definitely participate in that. Also, it depends very much on how we do approach places, right? I could actually say the same thing about New York. Though every time I'm hearing like, where's the queer party? It's in someone else's houses. What's available out there, it's not queer anymore. Or maybe it's just like it's already been absorbed into whatever it's available for everyone, or like the street. That's what we say, like the street place, right? So there is a question of trying to preserve that antagonism that you can see in the archive and you can see in the community that necessarily cannot be accessible to everyone, or otherwise it ruins it. Or like it is ruins in the sense that it consumes it. Not that it ruins it because it compromises it ideologically. It's just like it needs too much energy, too much care to deal with what you're going to, if you can marry your partner, if you're waiting for the carabinieri to knock on your door and take your kid away because you got a kid with your wife, and you cannot have that anymore, which is happening in Padua right now. So it's tiring. And sometimes people internalize a lot of that and close themselves and are like open space too much and just like keep it for themselves. However, it is also true that the other element that affects that is queer identity never existed in Italy because of the Catholic Church or because of X, Y, and Z. In this, the cultural production that we were like talking about tonight is doing amazing work. Departments were like offering more and more here in the US classes about this topic. We have a lot of people in this department only working on this. People like Michele was just like building bridges between different forms of culture with his work, like doing research and archive that I could do, but then thinking visually, going into the art world and say, okay, yes, there was also like an Italian artist thinking about HIV. This is not just US-centric discourse. This belongs also to other places and has belonged to other languages as well. So the plurality, it's something that can help. I would definitely, with this and other things, keep like exploring and keep making things available. But it is a communal effort, and it's a new one because like 80s, early 2000, we're talking about documents from 23 years ago. It's yesterday, basically. It's a very vibrant, very strong yesterday, but it takes time. It takes time for things to settle. And but yeah, There are a lot of gay bars in everywhere in Italy. I'm joking. It's just like a silly joke.
But we are optimistic.
Very
We are
optimistic.
very optimistic.
Very optimistic.
Given the context in Italy, we still are super optimistic, no? It's important to be.
Yeah.
My question is about visualizing the archive. I think what's so powerful about this exhibition is the way that you take text and make it dynamic, something that draws you in and you want to look at it and read it. So I'm curious if you could speak a little bit about your process of exhibition design and how you came up with the ways in which you visualize this archive that you've been talking about tonight.
Okay, it's supposed to be me. Actually, we did that also working with another person that it should be mentioned. And it's Giuseppe Recupero. It's an architect that it's working a lot in exhibition design. And personally, I've been working a lot with him in the past years, doing exhibition always on kind of like same issues. And with Giulia, we really like pushed on this idea of finding a proper way to open up an archive and to let people not only into a story but into an archive. So also like being able to bring with you, like take with you documents and do your own story, build your own narrative of those 20 years. And then together with Giuseppe, we like work together on this idea of circularity, on this like recurring of events, and then like together we came like around this idea of rings as also as like kind of like a force that like helps you like in the loop and kind of force you to like follow it. But yeah, it was a conversation we had initially, me and Giulia, and then like we let Giuseppe Recupero in the conversation to help us like thinking with the space and imagining how that space could be useful to what we wanted to do, and so not go against it. So also this idea of like this kind of like documents that then are designed in this like some sort of like A4 pages, where in a way like reminding of like the other A4 flyers that are all around the space in a way. Again, like thinking with the space instead of like opposing it. So, but also like kind of help the document to stand out by the repetition that the document has in the space. So this kind of repetition helps like also gives you a sense of multiplicity, of plurality, of like also in terms of numbers and quantity. I hope I gave you roughly an idea of on what was the process.
Are there other questions? No? Okay. Then thank you all for being here. Thank you, Giulia, Samuel, David, Michele. And I hope you enjoy the exhibition. Thank you.
Can I say just like...
Yeah.
Can I say just one big, huge, amazing thank you to Giulia from my side, and a huge, amazing thank you for real. It's gigantic. Grazie mille.